Welcome to Reset to Healthier Relationships Sunday night at 9. I am your host, Coach Glenda, here with my course manager, Mr. Rufus Carpenter. We are so glad to see everyone here tonight. I want to just start off by saying thank you for your sacrifice and your participation in Sunday night at 9. It is always a pleasure to see each and every one of you guys. So tonight we are on part 4. We are on part 4 tonight of this ongoing topic. Let me tell you, it has been an amazing topic for the past 3 weeks, and we are going to keep it going. The topic tonight is the outside child when infidelity brings a baby into the marriage. Now, again, I will repeat, this is our 4th week. Now, we have broken this up in a series because we wanted to deal with these scenarios and we want to deal with the healing part of it. And because of the feedback that we have been getting, it has been so amazing that we just want to keep it going because we want to get you from where you are right now to where you want to be, whether it's to heal some old pains or deal with your current situation. So we are going to dive into tonight's topic. Again, tonight's topic is the outside child when infidelity brings a child into the marriage. All right, let's take a few deep breaths. Just set the mood a little bit. Hopefully, you have your beverage of choice with you. We're going to breathe in through our nose, out our mouths a couple of times. Let's do maybe 3 rounds of that. Let's set the mood so we can get started. Okay. Tonight we are stepping into a very real, very sensitive topic. What happens when a married man has a child outside the marriage through cheating? This isn't a gossip session. This is not a blame session. This is a healing and truth session. Some women have lived this. Some women know somebody who has lived this. Some women are afraid this could happen, and some women are still carrying the pain from betrayal that changed their entire structure of their family. Before we talk, we are going to reset because this topic can touch grief, anger, embarrassment, and old wounds. So when you think about that, you think about what I was saying in the beginning about it touching grief, anger, embarrassment, and old wounds. And we're trying to get you from where you were, if you have dealt with this in the past, and try to get you to where you really want to be is to have peace and be comfortable in your current situation. We never tell anybody to leave. We never tell anybody to separate. We try to give you a different perspective of how to handle your current situation. Okay, I'm going to allow Mr. Carpenter, or I'm going to let Mr. Carpenter share a few words and get us started tonight. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Once again, I want to thank Coach Glenda for having this forum because this is something very, very near and dear to me because I've seen it so much in my own family and in my friends and some colleagues. And how do you handle it? How do you handle when your husband have a child outside of a marriage? And then what's next? Um, I want to first say I want to appreciate all those that participated up to this point that have participated by conversation and by testimony because some of the testimonies that has been given over the last 3 weeks has been tremendous because it actually gave us some grounding. It gave us some thought. It gave us something to think about because this last 3 weeks we've talked about it from the wife's point of view. We've talked about it from the child's point of view. We talked about it from the other lady's point of view, and we talked about it from the husband's point of view. But once again, we all have to realize that there is a woman in the middle of this, and this is the wife. This is something that she didn't sign up for, something she didn't plan, but it's here. It's here now. How do we handle it? Over the last 3 weeks, we went through all different versions of it. We went to what it looks like for each party. We gave some thoughts. Now, this week, I'm hoping that we can actually start putting this together and give those that haven't had a chance to get it out, because sometimes hearing yourself say it, hearing yourself say some of the things that's in your heart and in your mind, it makes it easy. It gets the monkey off your back. So tonight, I'm hoping that we can tie all this up together, because we want to get into that healing mode as quick as we can. I don't think we can get to it all tonight because there's so much to unpack. But over the next week or two, I hope that we can get into the healing part where we can tell you some of the things that we can do positive going forward. And that's where I'm at tonight, Coach Glenda and audience.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing. Mr. Carpenter, you want to continue?
Yes. I definitely will. When the reset, because Coach Glenda has a 3-step method where it's called reset, reconnect, and rise. And in the reset, you're actually dealing with what's there. And the first part about reset of this is, let's stop pretending it doesn't hurt. That's the first thing we got to reset. Let's stop pretending it don't hurt, because it hurts everybody. It hurts the wife. It hurts the marriage in general. It hurts the husband. And we know it hurts the other lady. So the first thing, how do we reset that? How do we reset that? Because, the wife, she's grieving. We know that she's grieved. People asking her questions. Look, miss, what are you going to do? What are your thoughts? How are you going to handle this? And when they start having this conversation with the wife, what's going through her mind? She's grieving, and then people ask her this over and over again. After the anger, the shame, that's where, let's talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about that, because what actually happened when people come before her and ask her, what you gonna do? And think about it, when she by herself, she asks herself, what you gonna do? So let's talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the truth about that decision-making after what you're gonna do. Okay, any thoughts, Glenda?
No, not at this moment. I'm following right along with you.
Okay, audience, what are some of the emotional things that you think this lady is saying to herself? If you was in this position, audience, what would be some of the emotional things that be going through your head? What are some of the things you would have to deal with, or you dealing with first? You didn't grieve. You didn't hid in the closet being ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
You've got anger, you mad with the world. Now let's start. How do we start? What are some of the things we start thinking about? How do we come back? How do we find ourselves? How do we center ourselves? I'm not gonna say how do we find peace, because I don't think we can find peace yet. I don't think we got to the part where we're looking for peace yet. I think we're looking to the part where, how do we focus? How do we wrap our mind around all this? Audience, what are some of the things? What are some of the things that would be on your mind? What are some of the situations that you would think you would handle first? And you can either come off your mic and come on, or you can put it in chat. Either way.
Well, I would first make sure my children were taken care of before I could even think about myself. Make sure that they're in place, that they're in a healing moment, and understanding the fact that they had nothing to do with the current situation. For myself, it took time. It took over 5 years because I skipped the grieving process.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go through the grieving process until I was forced to go through the grieving process. And once I went through the grieving process and started healing, then I began to heal and be okay with everything that happened, because I didn't want to divorce my husband. I love my husband.
Mhm.
And to be honest, I think
Mm-hmm.
still today, some part of me,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in there, still does love him. But it's a done deal. I can't be with him.
I commend you for that because that's real. As you were saying it, I could feel it, goosebumps all over my arm because I can feel that. Because when you said it's all about the children you have already. Let's get them in place. Let's get them whole. Let's let them realize that mommy's good, daddy's good, and if a new child's gonna be part, you have a bonus brother or sister. First getting it, and I understand that. So great. That's a great step for anybody and everybody. And I understand the part you said you didn't grieve right away. And it's interesting you said that it happened later because a lot of people say there's nothing to grieve about. But realistically, your body, your mind, and your soul tells you that. And your conscience tell you there's something to grieve about because what you lost, you've lost. Everybody said, no, you gained another child. But what you've lost in that partnership, what you lost in that trust, what you lost in your security. As a woman as a wife that has to go through that, you lose a lot. And a lot of people don't realize that. And also you lose a part of yourself. Even though you try hard to say no, you lose a part of yourself in that because you made a decision to be with this man, and you made a decision to be with this man thinking long term that this is your ride or die, this is your rock, this is your foundation. All of these things are there. When you start chipping away at all that, it makes it hard. It makes it hard to go forward. So that was an excellent testimony. Let me share too a little bit too. My sister, well, no, so my brother. I was getting it right. My brother told me that when in one of his classes, he was about in the sixth or seventh grade at that time. Says a little girl, I mean, another person, another student in that class was a female, and she said, "Is your daddy named Pete?" And my brother said, "Yeah, my dad is named Pete." He says, "You got a brother. You got a brother in my family that your dad, and told my brother came home. He didn't want to say anything to my mom or dad, but he said something to us, the other boys, and we kind of like left it alone. We heard it, we understood it, but we wouldn't go any further with it. So that's something that's real. And right now I'm 72 years old, and I can still remember that. I think I was in the fifth grade at the time. I can still remember it as a child. So this is something that's very near and dear. Anybody else want to comment about that?
Um, I,
About that part?
I did want to say that to your question, one of the questions I would ask myself if I was planning to stay or leave.
What we want the questions?
Whether I would stay or leave the marriage.
Oh, that's the question. Okay, I
Yes.
thought you were going. I thought you
No,
were
no, no,
ask
no.
you asked a question, and you were coming into a root from that. That was the root of your answer. Okay, got it, got it, got it. And when we're resetting, it's what actually happened. Once you look at it, what actually happened? The husband went somewhere and had a child. I think last week, Glenda, I think you said that it bother you because that shows that he's not covering or scrapping up or however you want to say that when he goes
Right,
out. So
right,
not only is it possible of a child, there may be some STDs or some other things that go along with that. So
correct.
when you talk about that and the truth of that decision of your husband going out having another child, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a lot. And at this point, I'm sure we all agree that the wife is able to have her emotions out loud. She don't have to hide what she feels. At this point, we feel that she should have the right to display. out loud what her feelings are.
Correct.
I don't think we should put her in a closet or hide or tell her, just accept it. I don't think those are right or correct answers at this time, because you cannot heal what's being hidden.
Right.
You cannot heal what's being hidden. You gotta let it come to the surface. You gotta let it come out. It's not about shame. It's not about all that stuff. Now it's about, how do we start fixing this? How do we start moving forward? How do we start accepting this? How do we start? Now let's talk about trying to find some peace. And in the peace part, that's the reconnect part. And reconnect first, before you can have peace, you got to rebuild.
Right.
You got to rebuild. Now, what does rebuilding look like in a situation like this? How do you rebuild? Is it automatic? Is it something have to come over time? Is it something that the wife has to do or something the husband has to do? Surely we're not going to look for the other woman to do anything.
Right.
So let's talk about that piece of it for a little bit. Is the healing automatic? Who has to do something? Is it everybody as a family got to come together? Does the husband, because he bore most of this, does he come out? How did this happen? Let's talk about how do we reconnect in this? What does that look like? Who carries the emotions in this part? Let's talk about that.
Everybody.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Gigi. Go ahead.
Everybody carries it. My ex will not speak to me to this day because I divorced him. He wanted to stay in the marriage and have all the working pieces and all the women and all the outside children and still go on as if nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process, the children were suffering and I was too. So I don't know other than that what I would do.
When you say some men feel that, hey, some men feel like no matter what, I'm the king of this castle. What I say goes. Don't do like I do, do like I say. I remember, and I hate to talk about my family as much, but this is stuff that I near and dear. We had 14 kids in our family. It was I was one of 14. My dad, when we were teenagers and just began to me and my brothers, we would just begin to date. My dad told us one day we were sitting down and all of us were sitting down, and at that time we had like a little open barrel outside with fire, and the weather was a little crisp, and we were out there talking, all the boys and dad. And my father told us only a lowly rat has one hole. And I didn't understand what he meant then. But as I got older and started realizing, so I listened to my older brothers, I understood what he said. And that, and I wasn't smart enough, or I didn't know enough to say, Dad, come on. I love my mom, so how are you going to say that kind of stuff? I didn't know that until I got older, realized what he was actually saying.
Mm-hmm.
So some men think that's the way of life.
Yeah. And they do. They do.
How do we change that culture? How do we change that mindset? How can we reconnect from a place like that? Because, I'm a father. I'm sure you're a mother. How do we change that? How do we stop that in our own children?
I don't know that we can.
That's
because
interesting.
if a person is raised a certain way and that's what their father, that's what their uncles has imparted into them as to how marriage should go, I really don't know that uh, it can change to where it would affect everyone. But I think that men and women generally, because women do it too, have to change themselves. So if they don't change, then it won't happen. But in the current society now, I mean, not only do they have the outside children, they have the the menage a trois and all of this other stuff going on. I was listening at some kids today, and I just couldn't believe my ears, because when you bring another person into the situation, somebody is going to catch feelings and emotions. It's a lot to 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 deal with different things, and then one of the women got pregnant. So I don't know if people will change. You know, I don't think so.
You know, because that with me, are we loving or are we mating? You know, because and that's my thought. Because when you connect with a person, and I, I'm guilty like most men. I've been out there in the street too, and it took me a while. I had to get mature enough to learn that you pay one way or another. You pay. It's going to eventually turn on you. You think you're getting away with something, but you're really not. So I had to mature. I had to get to that point, and I got it by knocking my head against the wall and dealing with that pain, hurt, and shame. So that's where I learned. But how do we get around that? How do we teach the children and the young men that that's not macho, that's not the way to go? You're not. You think you got another notch, you get another notch on your belt, but that's not life. That's not. And how do you do that?
Mm.
My
That's a hard.
my suggestion would be like when I talk to my son today, I reiterate like I've made a lot of mistakes, I try to encourage him to do differently than what his mom and dad did. I try to encourage him, a different way of doing things. I know that he was exposed to XYZ. Nobody is perfect. No parent is given a manual to raise children. So, with parents is it's more or less trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
So, he's slowly coming along, but I already know the damage is done. So I have to constantly keep talking to him. When he has his venting sessions, I have to keep talking to him to try to say, yeah, I know I can tell where this behavior is coming from. However, it's not the right reaction. You have to change up what you're doing if you're looking for the results that if you want different results. And then I know that he doesn't have any kids right now, but I know that as time progresses, Lord willing, he will be a father. And I know that the seeds that he plant, as well as me as a grandmother will plant, I would start out the gate, because I bumped my head so many times down to the bone that I'm not gonna educate my grandchildren to the point where I'm allow them to make the same mistakes that I've made in the past. I'm gonna try to nip it in the bud early on. And the only downside to that is because my son has experienced or seen so many of my faults and my failures that it's still tattooed on his mind, and even his dad's, our mistakes are still tattooed in his mind. So he really can't make the right decision right now, but I constantly keep talking to him. And my suggestion would be, at this day and age, you have to keep talking to your children, even if they're 18, 21, 25. Keep talking to them. Yeah, I see what you're doing, it's not right. And if they buck back, just say, yeah, I understand, but I've been where you've been, and I'm trying to tell you where it's going to end up, and you're not going to like it. And you just got to keep talking to them. Who knows? You may not get an instant change from your child, or someone in the family, but eventually that stuff starts to resonate, and they be like, man, I should have listened to my mom, I should have listened to my grandma, I should have listened to my dad, because you know what, they were right. Because if I would have did this long time ago, like they told me, I wouldn't even be where I am today. But it takes for children, especially like for my son, for that particular situation, it takes a lot to try to curb what they've already experienced and seen. But I feel like the more I talk to him, the more I pray for him, I believe that eventually he's going to come around and see things differently. But some of the choices and decisions that he make, I'm like, son, ooh, that might not be the best thing to do because you're not gonna like the end result.
You're right there. That's 100% correct. Because in this situation, we understand why it happened. We understand how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do we reconnect? Do we, we're not telling the wife, because that's who's in the middle. That's who we're trying to support tonight. We're not telling the wife to stay. We're not telling the wife to leave, because one of the things they'll mention tonight is that even years later, you still have some type of love for that husband or the other, even though they're out of the picture and no way they can come back in the picture, you still have those feelings. So somewhere that's there. So how do we reconnect with the truth? How do we reconnect with our own self-worth? What does a wife needs to have in order to have that emotional security and clear communication with the husband, the other woman, everybody in concern here? What does that look like? In order for a wife to have the emotional safety going forward, how what does she need in this situation? Is it that she needs clarity or communication with the husband and the other child's mother? Is that a three-way conversation that has to happen? Or is that just some verbal of the husband say, here's what consistently I can promise you that's going to happen from this point on. I'm going to do this or not do that. Or is it that the wife have to connect just with herself and say, hey, look, I'm woman enough to either make a decision to stay or woman enough to make a decision to go? How does that look like? Let's talk about that part for a little bit, because that emotional safety is one to talk about. Is the conversation and the boundaries between the three, the husband, the wife, and the other woman? Or is it a verbal conversation with the wife with herself saying, hey, I gotta see where I'm at in this, what I can take and what I can't take. I can just find peace in the fact that I'm strong enough to go forward. What does that look like, ladies?
I would think that there has to be some clear boundaries set between the husband and wife and the other woman, as well as he has to say or make her feel comfortable and secure again in the relationship, especially if she decides to stay and not leave the marriage. But there has to definitely be some clear boundaries, because calling after midnight and the child need new pair of shoes. The baby don't need a new pair of shoes at 12 midnight. No, baby doesn't need that. You can't just be calling me at midnight about something that is not emergent. So there has to be some clear boundaries with the father and the other woman. Look, we need to go ahead and, set the standard. This is not going to take place, put boundaries in place. She can't call past XYZ. She can only call if it's emergency, school functions and stuff like that. It's no, just chit chat on the phone and the random texts. No, that's not what's going on. And then he needs to, there needs to be some communication between the two of them where she's comfortable and safe again and stable in the relationship, because it's damaged, because she's
Correct.
blindsided by this
Correct.
child.
Correct.
Because if
Correct.
she decides to stay, she needs to know. For me, I would need to know this is not going to happen again. Or is there another one out there that you haven't told me about?
Mm.
So I need to know that we're one and done. This is one that has popped up, and this is it. Especially if I decide to stay, because I think it was a lady on the call last week that said she left. She couldn't handle it. And I can respect that, because she knew herself. She couldn't deal with it. When you recognize and realize that I don't want to, how she actually said, I can forgive, but I never forget. She did say that last week,
Mm-hmm.
but she knew that if she stayed in it, she probably would have continued to harbor feelings about it, and maybe it could have rolled over onto the child, which was an innocent person in the equation. But when you
You know,
decide to stay, you have to, that the spouse, the husband, has to make sure that the wife is comfortable in her position all over again.
I'm glad that we're going through this topic in the way we're going through it tonight, because this is something that a person going through it, whether it's the wife or whether it's the other woman or whether it's the husband, they can go back, because we put this on YouTube. Where everything we record now, we put on YouTube. It's on by Wednesday, and you can go back and look at this, because a lot of people we deal with aren't going to go to professional counsel, aren't going to go to therapy.
Right.
But when they actually see us, they hear us, see us talk about it like we're talking about now, because we're talking open and honest. We're not thinking about shame, we're not thinking about hurt, nobody. We're thinking about it. We're trying to be as true as we can to go through this. So this helps a person to work through this, because if you have to work through this by yourself without any kind of help, it's very hard, because you can't rebuild a marriage with secrecy.
Right.
You can't rebuild a marriage behind guilt. You can't rebuild a marriage with this kind of pressure. Because pressure, you got to release it. You have to rebuild it with some type of truth, some type of accountability, some type of structure, and some type of consistent care.
Right, consistent.
Because not only the wife has to be cared for, the other child has to be taken care of. And we don't know the situation of the woman. It could have been a situation that the woman on the outside might not have known about the wife. We don't really know that.
Right.
Because she didn't know the wife. She thought she had something in this man too. That's a double whammy. She's feeling some of the same things a wife is feeling. So she may need consistent care. So let's look at it from that point of view. How do you rebuild a marriage on secrecy, which is not a work, and you can't build it on guilt, which is not going to work. You can't build it on pressure, which is not going to work.
Right.
It has to be truth. It has to be accountability. It has to be structure. It has to be consistent care. Let's talk about how that piece looked like for a little bit. Anybody want to chime in or put in chat or talk about that piece? Because that piece is important, because this is the piece where we start reconnecting with ourselves. We start reconnecting with the situation in such a way that it's not driving us, we're driving it. Like I said earlier, the wife has to realize, she has to talk to herself and see if she's strong enough to stay.
Right.
Is she strong enough to take what's coming next? Is she strong enough to be a parent and co-parent the other child? Is she strong enough to rely on the husband, to have the husband come back into the situation? Is she strong enough to still be the wife to this husband that she know has cheated?
After building trust. They have to build trust, and once trust is lost, it's hard to get it back.
But
you have to become, but it does happen. You do become all right with it eventually, but it's not overnight. It's over time. It's over counseling. It's over the harsh words. It's the sleepless nights, the nights on the sofa, the not coming home. It takes time. It just takes time.
I think they both would need to go to counseling together.
Yes.
Not just her. They can eventually venture off, but I think they both would need counseling, some type of coaching. And then if more is needed, they can do individual session, but definitely, because there has to be a mediator that, will make sure one person gets everything that they have out, and then the other one, without interruptions. Because I know that I had taken marriage counseling before, but with this particular person, I never made it to the altar. But I remember that when we was in marriage counseling, he was quick to interrupt me when it was my turn to speak. And I was like, no, it started to bother me. But then I recalled the counselor at the time would say, well, let her speak. Let her get everything she has to say out, and then we're going to wait for your turn. So with counseling, coaching, whichever one is available to them, they need to participate. And if more is needed, they can venture off and go. The wife can go to coaching or counseling by herself to work through some inner stuff, some me stuff, some wife stuff, like, help me to accept this, let me talk this out, because I do desire to stay in my marriage. Because if she didn't want to stay, she wouldn't even consider coaching or counseling at all. She would just been like, deuces, peace out. So,
Mm-hmm.
I just really believe that the only way to really work through a scenario situation like this is with coaching. And then after they went through maybe 2, 3 rounds of it for themselves, bring in the children to help them accept the outside children, the outside child. Because everybody's a part of the situation. They're all going through. Everybody have mixed feelings about this new blended family. So you definitely can't discount the children, because it is what it is. They're underage. They really don't have an opinion or a say so, but they have feelings.
You said a lot there. You said a lot there. Because when you reconnect with your feelings and your thoughts, like that's consistent care. That consistent care, and that consistent care is not just for the new child, like you
Right.
said, it's for the wife, and the husband may need it. Some people, some husbands, when they do it, they can see the fault, and they need counseling help too. Some are some need that counseling, that consistent help. Once, like you said, it don't have to always be professional help. It could be coaching.
Right.
It
Correct.
could be coaching, because a lot of people in our community neighborhood aren't going to professional counselors. They're
Right.
not looking for therapists. They're looking for a bottle, or they're looking for a good friend.
Or
You know, you're right. Younger age that smoke. You're right. They said it calms them. But the thoughts are, you need that consistent help.
yeah,
You
you do.
need to rebuild. And you got to take. What. At this point, we're talking about the rise part, because I think we've connected with that we've connected by saying you can't build a marriage with secrecy. You can't build a marriage with guilt or pressure. It has to be rebuilt with truth. So you got to reconnect with truth, accountability, consistent care, and structure. We've connected with that. So the next step is, how do you rise? How do you rise? Does it mean that the wife or the other woman disappear in this crisis?
No.
You know, okay, so we know that's not it. That's not it. Whether the wife decide to stay, whether she decide to separate, or she pause or rebuild.
Hmm.
She must rise with clarity. Has to be clarity, no matter what she do, whether she stay, whether she separate, whether she pause or rebuild. Has to be clarity. What does clarity look like? What are some of the questions you ask yourself when you look for clarity? The first, what are my next steps? How do I proceed? How do I go forward? That's one of the first things that ask. And then, like you said, Glenn, and like the other young lady said, Gigi said, need support. You got to have support. You need support, because especially if you're separating and you got children, do you take the husband for child support? Or do you just say, I'm gonna do this on my own? So that you need support. You need support no matter which way you go. And I think you said, Glenda, you said got to have boundaries, and that's the only way you can protect your peace.
Yeah.
Boundaries is key. That's the only way. Now I know you can say boundaries could be click, on block, or however. I'm not. With this new generation, click block. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is it has to be some type of boundaries.
It does.
It has to be some kind of boundaries. And then what would be, if you got boundaries, what would be a good period to circle back around, or to refresh? Well, let's talk about a time period. What would be a time period to actually refresh, to circle back around, or to see if you got your plan in place? Because after you've arisen and you've got the The first wise step, you've got that in place. You know what that looks like. You know the support you need, and you're kind of getting that support. So, and you've got boundaries in place to protect your peace. Now, what kind of time frame would you circle back to make sure this plan you got in place going forward is working or isn't working or need to be evaluated? Let's talk about that. What the timetable looks like. Audience suggestions or thoughts? I know Gigi said once that she said later on in her life when it happened to her, she still had feelings and she thought about it. You want to share that a little bit, Gigi, if you don't mind?
You talking about still being in love with him?
Yes, being in love or still being in marriage, however you want to put it.
Um, he was he was horrible, and even though he was horrible, I still loved him. Uh, through it all, I still love my husband. But you have to do it daily to circle back. It's no week thing. You got to circle back every day because you still have to determine whether or not you really want to stay. Because early on, uh, I wanted to stay in a relationship and stay with him, but it was a hard stop and it was a hard no. You gotta take care of you. You gotta, if you want to live, you got to get out of this. So, I revisit it every day.
Okay. Okay.
But one thing that we have not talked about um, is the people, the voices that other people are saying things, and oh, I wouldn't do this or I'll do that, and now that's where you have to really be strong to quiet the voices of other people, because they will affect you. They'll tell you, okay, you do this, and you don't do this, or you do that, or I wouldn't do that. You have to decide for yourself, because people will try to decide for you
Right.
what you want to do in a relationship. So you have to keep everybody out of it and quiet the voices and go and try to pray or whatever you do and find some um, direction as to what you need to do. But that's my thought on it.
Okay. That's very strong. That's very strong. Because I was thinking more about the voices in your head, what you're telling yourself. I think is what we've been drilling on for the last couple of weeks. But I forgot all about the voices in your ear, because a lot of people want to please the voices in the ear. They feel the voices in the ear is the standard. They feel that the voices in their ear is their committee or their acceptance or their cheerleaders.
Mm-hmm.
So if that voice in your ear is such a strong motivator for you and to you, you're right. That can cause you to make a lot of mistakes, an awful lot of mistakes. Because when you're in a situation like this and your husband cheating on another child, and now you got your husband, you got the child, and you got the other woman, that's a lot going on right there. You got people on the outside that really don't know the whole story. They don't know what you feel. They don't know the situation of the other woman, but they tell you based on what they've seen before. Girl, ain't no way in the hell I beat her at that supper. Girl, get me. That's not gonna help. That's not helping, right? So that's a great thing that we overlook. Gigi, thanks for bringing it up, because that voice in your ear can be poison.
It can be.
It could be poison, and it could be some help. I don't know. But from what I've experienced with the voice in the ear, they don't have a clue.
Right.
They're looking at their situation. And a lot of times, these are people that have never been in a situation they're giving you knowledge about. They're
Yep.
giving you knowledge and wisdom about a situation they've never been in and don't know nothing about.
Right.
So true.
And
Yeah.
those are the
So
ones you need to really watch out for.
thanks for bringing that up. That's very, very important. That's very important. So
That
things
goes way
we,
back to that other topic we had about the community pressure.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
it does. It
It
does.
does. Yes. A lot of people can give you advice on stuff that they've never experienced. And it's like, okay, how did you come up with this? If you've never been through it. And I had to learn the hard way. I had to start listening to people that, had been through it and overcame it, who fell down and bust their head down to the white meat. And I just want to say that, well, that's one thing about Rufus and I. As long as we've been friends, almost 30 years, I learned a lot of business, strategies, a lot of business moves just from him making mistakes. And I always hold his advice in high regard because I know he's already been there. So if I ever needed to purchase a house, a car, anything major or business related, he was always my go-to person. And he would say, Glenda, I don't think that's the right thing to do, or Glenda, you should try that. And I will always accept his advice because he's been there, done that, whether he succeeded or he's failed. His his advice was always on point. And from that, I had to start learning in my personal life. You can't listen to everybody, especially the ones who's never been through anything. If you've never had a checking account, how can you tell me how to, spend my money or how to pay my bills? If you've never
Right.
had more than $1,000 in your savings account, how can you tell me how to save? Or girl, I wouldn't get a 401k. I wouldn't sign up for the pension. Why? You don't even have a savings account. It's like, how can you tell me something if you've never been through anything? So though now that is so true. And sometimes we do have to learn the hard way. But I know that for my history, for Glenda's history, I will sit back and pray. And I said, Lord, bring somebody my way that can help me out of this right now because I just don't know what to do because I don't tell everybody everything because I know the advice might not be legit or it might not apply to my situation. And sometimes I already know you ain't never been through this. How can you tell me about kids if you don't have one child? So trust me, I totally agree with that. You need to watch who you tell your business to and watch who you seek help from. I won't even take help from a counselor that has never been married. Because how can you tell me how to, solve a conflict in my marriage if you're not married? All you know is what the textbook tells you or what you've learned in school. You've never been through anything.
The last part about the person in your ear, the voice in your ear, last part about that person have no accountability.
Mm,
Whatever they tell you, whether it's right, wrong, or indifference, they don't have any accountability.
right.
Not none.
They're telling you something, and when it goes wrong, oh well,
No, they're
you know,
somewhere in the corner sniggling at you.
yep, girl, you took that what I said. Oh hell, you know, and
I was
that's
just
the thing. Yeah, that's the major thing. There's no accountability there. So
Mhm.
when a person tells, even in counseling, like when Jen and Glenda's practice, we can't just give you we can't just give you advice willy nilly. It has to be some type of structure, some type of ground rules for us to even give you advice. And then when we give you advice, we're giving you on proven tools. We're
Right.
not just saying, girl, I would do this, or hey, you know what? Hell, no, we're not doing that. We've got some proven, some science-based stuff that we use. But my thing is, we're still in the rising part. And sometimes when you rise, it don't always that it's not always that the marriage survives.
Right.
true.
Right.
There's sometimes the marriage don't survive.
Correct.
No, but what should survive is that wife being whole.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
the objective. She be whole, feel whole. And we're always going to protect the child. Let's make sure we understand that without saying a child is always, should not always be protected. We're not saying hell with the child. We're not saying that. But we're saying that wife should survive whole. That's the key. And if that don't happen, then we've kind of failed somewhere. We failed somewhere, especially if there are other kids involved. Because if the wife has to proceed to be mother for these other children on a daily basis, and this is great what Gigi said, that she would visit it every day, revisit every day. Because normally in counseling, we always tell you 90 days. Our rule is give it 90 days. That's our standard, 90 days. Girl, let's check back in 90 days. Let me give you this 90-day roadmap. That's our thing. But when Gigi said I would visit it every day, and that's right. Sometimes you can only do it day by day and day by the help of God and by glory, day by day.
Her
So
emotions are on a roller coaster.
yes. So that's when she put that out. That was awesome. That was awesome. Now we're coming to the last 10 minutes. At this point, do anybody have anything about this subject that they want to say or bring up that we haven't brought out tonight, or some thoughts they want to let us know? Because like I said from the beginning, tonight what we want to do is tie everything up we've done so far up to this point. And this is the fourth week of this series. And I wanted to make sure we had everything out that we need to talk about, because next week we're going to start putting healing in place. We're going to start saying, what going forward actually look like. What are some of the techniques? Because next week we're going to deal with this as a relationship crisis support. What type of support would we give you? What type of support would Glenda's practice have for you? What type of support? And we're going to deal with this as a relationship crisis support. We're looking for emotional stability, truth telling, some decisions with clarity. That's what next week is about. So what do you have this week still in your heart and still in your mind that we need to discuss up to this point? We have about 9 minutes to discuss that. Anybody want to come off mute and discuss that, anything that we left on the table, anything they want to bring out or we did not explore or uncover over these last 3 weeks? Okay. Any last thoughts, Glenda,
No,
about what we talked about?
no, I think we did pretty good.
Okay. The only thing I say is don't always victimize the other woman. Some women actually say, "Girl, I couldn't get the nigga, so I'm gonna mess it up with you and him. So I'm gonna make sure I pull him and have a baby." Everybody don't think that way. So let's not say the other woman's a villain or that. Let's not say that, because we don't, like I said from the beginning, we don't know the situation. We don't know the situation. So let's not arbitrarily say baby mama and start. No, let's not do that. That's the only part that I want us to realize, that because the other person's a human being too. I'm sure they lost some of themselves in this triangle. But over this last 3 weeks, our thought has been the wife in the middle, the child always. But once again, let's not victimize the lady on the outside. Okay.
Over.
That's all I got. Linda, you want to take us on?
All right. As we close tonight, I want every woman listening to remember this. You are not wrong for hurting. You are not weak for needing time. You are not bitter because you need boundaries. You are not selfish because you want to know where you stand. If this has happened in your life, your healing deserves care. May you have the courage to face the truth. May you have the wisdom to ask the right questions. May you have the strength to set boundaries without hate. May you have the peace to know when your life is not over because someone else broke trust. Whether your next step is conversation, counseling, separation, prayer, journaling, or stillness, take the next wise step. Until next Sunday night at 9, keep resetting, keep reconnecting, and keep rising. See you next Sunday night at 9. Good night, everyone.
Good night,
Good
everybody.
night.